In the heart of Buckingham Palace, where tradition flows through every corridor like an unbreakable river, Princess Alexandra made a decision that would shake the very foundations of royal protocol. With trembling hands, she carried a leather case containing the Queen Mother's most precious private jewels, pieces never meant for public eyes, never intended to leave the royal vault. Her destination? Catherine, the Princess of Wales, a woman still finding her place in a world of ancient rules and whispered expectations. What happened next would challenge 300 years of royal tradition and forever change how the monarchy viewed inheritance, family bonds, and the delicate balance between duty and love. This is the true story of a moment when the human heart triumphed over royal protocol, when a grieving daughter chose connection over convention, and when the future of the royal family hung in the balance of one woman's courageous choice. The world would never know the full truth of that private meeting, but those closest to the family understood something fundamental had shifted in the House of Windsor. Princess Alexandra had chosen to honor her mother's memory in a way that defied every rule she had been taught to follow. The question was not whether she had the right to do so, but whether the monarchy could survive such a beautiful act of rebellion. The morning light filtered through the grand windows of Clarence House as Princess Alexandra stood in her late mother's private chambers, her fingers tracing the velvet interior of an ornate jewelry box that had remained untouched for 6 months. The Queen Mother had passed away peacefully in her sleep, leaving behind not just a nation in mourning, but a daughter grappling with the weight of both grief and responsibility that seemed to press down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Alexandra had always been the dutiful daughter, the one who understood protocol without question, who attended every state function with the perfect smile and appropriate words. At 68 years old, she had spent her entire life navigating the complex waters of royal duty, never once challenging the established order that governed every aspect of their existence. Yet here she stood, contemplating an action that would send shockwaves through the palace walls and beyond. The jewelry box contained pieces that most of the world had never seen. These were not the crown jewels displayed in the Tower of London for tourists to admire behind thick glass. These were personal treasures, gifts from long-dead monarchs, family heirlooms passed down through generations of royal women, each piece carrying stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy. There was the sapphire brooch that Queen Victoria had worn to her beloved Albert's funeral, the pearl necklace that had belonged to Queen Mary, and the diamond earrings that the Queen Mother had worn on her wedding day in 1923. Alexandra picked up a particular piece that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a delicate tiara, smaller than the grand state pieces, crafted from white gold and set with diamonds that caught the morning light like captured stars. Her mother had worn it only once, to Alexandra's own wedding 45 years ago. It was a piece meant for intimate family occasions, for moments when the weight of the crown could be temporarily set aside for the warmth of familial love. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Alexandra quickly close the jewelry box. Her private secretary, Margaret Whitfield, appeared in the doorway with a sympathetic expression that had become all too familiar in recent months. Margaret had served the royal household for over 20 years and understood the delicate balance between personal grief and public duty that members of the royal family were expected to maintain.
"Your Royal Highness," Margaret said softly, "the palace has been calling about the inventory."
They're ready to begin the formal cataloging of Her late Majesty's personal effects. There was something in Margaret's tone that suggested she understood the significance of this moment, the finality it represented. Alexandra nodded, her hand still resting on the jewelry box. She knew what the formal cataloging meant. Once the palace took possession of these items, they would be distributed according to strict protocols established centuries ago. Some pieces would go to the crown jewel collection. Others would be allocated to senior members of the royal family based on their position in the line of succession, and still others would be carefully stored away, perhaps never to see daylight again. But her mother had expressed different wishes in those final precious conversations they had shared. The Queen Mother had spoken often of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, during her last months. She had watched with admiration as Catherine navigated the challenging transition from commoner to royal, facing intense media scrutiny and public expectations with grace and determination that reminded the Queen Mother of herself as a young woman entering the royal family in the 1920s. "She reminds me of myself when I was young," the Queen Mother had confided to Alexandra during one of their last private talks. She has that same strength, that ability to find her own way while honoring what came before. The family needs that kind of spirit, especially now. The Queen Mother had paused, her aged hands folding carefully in her lap. I worry that the weight of tradition will crush that spirit if we're not careful. Alexandra had been surprised by her mother's candor. The Queen Mother had always been the epitome of royal propriety, never questioning established protocols or speaking critically of royal traditions. But grief and approaching death had a way of clarifying what truly mattered, stripping away pretense to reveal the human heart beneath the royal facade. The conversation had taken place in this very room, with afternoon tea spread between them and the soft ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece marking the precious minutes they had left together. The Queen Mother had gestured toward the jewelry box with a subtle movement that spoke volumes to her daughter, who had learned to read such signals over decades of royal life. Those pieces, the Queen Mother had said, they're not meant to sit in vaults or be worn only for state occasions. They were meant to connect us, to remind us that beneath all the titles and protocols, we're still women, still mothers and daughters and sisters. Catherine understands that in a way that gives me hope for the future of this family. Alexandra had wanted to ask more questions, to understand exactly what her mother meant, but the Queen Mother had grown tired, and the moment had passed into the comfortable silence that had always existed between them. Now, 6 months later, Alexandra was left to interpret those words and decide how to honor her mother's unspoken wishes. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on Alexandra's chest as she considered the implications. To remove these pieces before the official inventory would be seen as a direct violation of established protocol. The royal household operated on the principle that personal wishes, even those of senior family members, must be subordinate to institutional continuity. Every item, every possession, every gesture was part of a larger tapestry that had been woven over centuries. Yet Alexandra could not shake the memory of Catherine at the Queen Mother's funeral, standing with quiet dignity as the nation mourned, her 3 young children beside her as she represented the future of the monarchy. There had been something in Catherine's demeanor that day, a combination of genuine grief and steady strength, that reminded Alexandra powerfully of her mother's words. Margaret cleared her throat gently, drawing Alexandra back to the present moment. Your Royal Highness, shall I inform the palace that you're ready for them to proceed? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implication and finality. Alexandra looked once more at the jewelry box, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity that surprised her. Not yet, Margaret, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear that ran through her. I have some personal business to attend to first. Please tell them I'll need until tomorrow to complete my own review of Mother's effects. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, but her training prevented her from asking questions. She had served the royal family long enough to recognize when discretion was required. Of course, Your Royal Highness. Shall I arrange your car for this afternoon? Yes, Alexandra replied, already moving toward her private phone to make a call that would set everything in motion. And Margaret? This conversation remains between us for now. As Margaret retreated, Alexandra picked up the leather case that had belonged to her mother, a traveling jewelry case that had accompanied the Queen Mother on countless royal tours and state visits around the world. It was understated and elegant, with compartments lined in cream silk that could hold a surprising number of precious pieces. More importantly, it was discreet, designed to transport valuables without drawing attention. Alexandra began the careful process of selecting pieces from her mother's collection, each choice weighted with meaning and consequence. She included the small diamond tiara, the sapphire brooch, a string of perfectly matched pearls, and several rings that had been worn by generations of royal women. Each piece represented not just monetary value, but emotional significance that connected past, present, and future in an unbroken chain of feminine strength and resilience. The sound of her own heartbeat seemed unusually loud in the quiet room as Alexandra completed her task. She was acutely aware that she was crossing a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. The royal family had survived for centuries by maintaining strict adherence to protocol, by placing institutional stability above personal sentiment. What she was about to do challenged that fundamental principle in a way that could have far-reaching consequences. Yet as she closed the leather case and felt its satisfying weight in her hands, Alexandra experienced a sense of peace, that had eluded her since her mother's death. This felt right in a way that following protocol never had. This felt like honoring her mother's true legacy, not just her official role, but her humanity and her wisdom about what the family truly needed to survive and thrive in changing times. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windows as Alexandra prepared to leave Clarence's house, the leather case tucked discreetly under her arm. She paused at the threshold of her mother's room, looking back at the space where so many important conversations had taken place, where wisdom had been shared and love expressed in the quiet moments between public appearances.
"I hope I'm doing the right thing, Mama," she whispered to the empty room, using the childhood name she hadn't spoken aloud in years.
The silence that greeted her words felt like permission, like blessing, like the warm embrace she missed more than she could express. Outside, her driver waited with the royal car, unaware of the precious cargo his passenger would soon be carrying, or the constitutional crisis that might unfold from what seemed like a simple family visit. Alexandra settled into the familiar leather seat and gave the address that would change everything: Adelaide Cottage, where Catherine and William made their family home away from the formal constraints of palace life. The drive through the English countryside gave Alexandra time to rehearse what she would say, how she would explain her decision to violate centuries of royal protocol for the sake of honoring her mother's wishes and supporting a young woman who represented the future of their ancient institution. The rolling hills and green fields outside the car window seemed to reflect the timeless nature of the monarchy itself. Constant, yet ever-changing, rooted in tradition, yet necessarily adaptive to survive. As the car approached Windsor, Alexandra felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety that reminded her of childhood Christmas mornings, when the excitement of giving gifts was tempered by the uncertainty of their reception. She was about to offer Catherine something far more valuable than jewelry. She was about to offer her a connection to the long line of royal women who had faced similar challenges, similar scrutiny, similar pressures to be perfect while remaining human. The leather case beside her on the seat seemed to pulse with the weight of history and the promise of future understanding between women who had chosen to marry into an institution that demanded everything while giving support that was often more formal than emotional. Alexandra closed her eyes and thought of her mother's words about Catherine's strength and spirit, holding on to those thoughts like a talisman against the doubt that threatened to overwhelm her resolve. Tomorrow, when the palace discovered what she had done, there would be questions, criticism, and possibly consequences that she couldn't yet imagine. But today, in this moment, between decision and action, Alexandra allowed herself to believe that love and understanding could triumph over protocol, that the human heart could guide the monarchy toward a future that honored both tradition and compassion. The car turned through the gates of Windsor, carrying her toward a conversation that would define not just her relationship with Catherine, but her understanding of what it truly meant to serve both family and crown in an age when both needed to evolve to survive. Adelaide Cottage sat nestled among ancient oak trees, like a jewel hidden in the heart of Windsor Great Park, its red brick walls and climbing ivy creating an atmosphere of warmth that stood in sharp contrast to the formal grandeur of the nearby castle. As Princess Alexandra's car crunched along the gravel driveway, she could see children's bicycles scattered on the lawn and a forgotten football near the front steps. Signs of the normal family life that Catherine and William had worked so hard to create for their children, despite the extraordinary circumstances of their birth. Catherine was in the kitchen when she heard the unfamiliar sound of tires on gravel, her hands covered in flour from the afternoon baking session she had been enjoying with Charlotte. The 8-year-old had insisted on making biscuits for tea, a request that Catherine had happily granted as a welcome respite from the endless stream of official engagements that filled her calendar. These precious moments of domestic normalcy had become increasingly rare as her role within the royal family continued to expand and evolve. Through the window, Catherine caught sight of the official car and felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that always accompanied unexpected royal visits. In the 4 years since her marriage to William, she had learned that spontaneous visits from senior family members were rarely social calls. They usually signaled some crisis or concern that required immediate attention, some breach of protocol that needed addressing, or some family drama that threatened to spill into public view. Catherine quickly washed her hands and smoothed her hair, calling to Charlotte to tidy up the kitchen while she went to greet their unexpected guest. As she opened the front door, she was surprised to see Princess Alexandra stepping out of the car,
a leather case clutched tightly in her gloved hands. Alexandra's usually composed expression showed signs of strain, her mouth set in a line that suggested internal conflict and determination in equal measure. "Alexandra," Catherine said, offering a warm smile despite her confusion. "What a lovely surprise. Please come in." She stepped aside to allow the older woman to enter, noting the way Alexandra's eyes seemed to take in every detail of the cottage's interior as if seeing it for the first time, though she had visited several times since William and Catherine had made it their primary residence. The cottage's interior reflected Catherine's personal taste in ways that her apartment at Kensington Palace never could. Here, family photographs sat on side tables, next to children's drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, and comfortable sofas invited actual conversation rather than formal audience. It was a space where the royal family could simply be a family, where protocols could be relaxed and genuine relationships could flourish. Away from the scrutinizing eyes of courtiers and press, Alexandra paused in the sitting room, her gaze lingering on a photograph of Catherine, with the Queen Mother taken just months before the elderly monarch's death. In the picture, both women were laughing at something outside the frame, their heads tilted toward each other in a gesture of genuine affection that had surprised many observers at the time. The Queen Mother had rarely shown such open warmth toward members of the family who had married into the monarchy, maintaining instead a polite distance that preserved royal dignity. "She was very fond of you," Alexandra said quietly, nodding toward the photograph. Her voice carried a weight of emotion that surprised Catherine, who had grown accustomed to the careful emotional restraint that characterized most royal interactions. "She spoke of you often in those final months, more than I think you knew." Catherine felt a tightness in her chest at the mention of the Queen Mother, whose death had affected her more deeply than she had expected. The elderly monarch had become an unexpected source of guidance and comfort during Catherine's difficult adjustment to royal life, offering advice that was both practical and profound, helping her navigate challenges that few people in the world could understand. "She was wonderful to me," Catherine replied, her voice soft with remembered affection. "She made me feel like I belonged in ways that protocol never could. I miss our conversations terribly." She gestured toward the sofa, inviting Alexandra to sit, but the older woman remained standing, her grip on the leather case tightening almost imperceptibly. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her face still dusted with flour, and her eyes bright with curiosity about their unexpected visitor. She had been raised to be respectful of royal protocol, but at 8 years old, her natural inquisitiveness often overcame her training in formal behavior. She studied Princess Alexandra with the frank assessment that only children possessed, taking in the older woman's obvious nervousness and the mysterious case she carried. "Hello, Your Royal Highness," Charlotte said, offering a small curtsy that was more charming than technically correct. "Mommy and I were making biscuits. Would you like some with tea?" The simple offer carried an innocence that seemed to ease some of the tension in the room, reminding both women of the family context that surrounded all royal relationships, no matter how complicated they might become. Alexandra's expression softened as she looked at the little girl, seeing in her features the blend of royal bloodline and common heritage that represented the monarchy's evolution into the modern age. "That would be lovely, dear," she said, her voice gentler than it had been moments before. "Perhaps you could ask cook to prepare a proper tea service for your mother and me? We have some important grown-up matters to discuss." Charlotte nodded seriously, understanding instinctively that this was one of those moments when children were expected to make themselves scarce, while adults dealt with mysterious royal business. She disappeared into the kitchen with the sense of importance that came from being entrusted with a real responsibility, leaving Catherine and Alexandra alone in the sitting room with its comfortable furniture and family photographs. Alexandra finally sat down, placing the leather case carefully on the coffee table between them. The case seemed to draw all attention in the room, its presence suggesting secrets and significance that made Catherine increasingly nervous. She had learned to read the subtle signals of royal communication, and everything about Alexandra's demeanor suggested that this visit would change something fundamental in their relationship. "Catherine," Alexandra began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with how to explain her presence. "I've come to speak with you about my mother's final wishes, wishes that were never formally documented, but were expressed to me in our last conversations." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the leather case as if drawing strength from its familiar texture. The mention of the Queen Mother's final wishes sent a chill through Catherine, who suddenly understood that this conversation would touch on matters far more serious than she had initially realized. In the months since the Queen Mother's death, there had been rumors within palace circles about inheritance disputes and family tensions over the distribution of personal effects, but Catherine had assumed these were the usual gossip that surrounded any significant royal death. "She spoke about you frequently," Alexandra continued, her voice growing stronger as she found her footing in the difficult conversation. "About your strength, your ability to adapt and grow within our family, while maintaining your own identity. She was concerned about the pressures you face, the expectations that seemed to multiply with each passing year." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the thought of the Queen Mother discussing her struggles with such understanding and compassion. The adjustment to royal life had been more difficult than she had ever publicly acknowledged, requiring her to rebuild her identity while constantly being watched and judged by people who seemed to know exactly how a proper royal woman should behave. She worried, Alexandra said, that the weight of tradition might crush the very spirit that makes you valuable to this family. She believed that you needed connection to the women who came before you, not just their examples, but their actual presence in some form. Alexandra's hand moved to rest on the leather case, and Catherine suddenly understood that whatever was inside represented that connection. The sound of Charlotte organizing tea things in the kitchen provided a domestic backdrop to their conversation, a reminder that royal life, no matter how extraordinary, was still built on the foundation of family relationships and human connection. Catherine found herself thinking of her own mother, whose straightforward advice and unconditional love had sustained her through the most challenging moments of royal adjustment. "What are you saying, Alexandra?" Catherine asked, though she was beginning to understand the implications of the older woman's words. The careful way Alexandra spoke, the weight she gave to each phrase, suggested that this conversation was leading towards something that would require courage from both of them. Alexandra opened the leather case with movements that were both reverent and decisive, revealing the carefully arranged collection of jewelry that had been selected with such care hours earlier. Each piece caught the afternoon light streaming through the cottage windows, creating points of brilliance that seemed to hold the concentrated essence of royal history and feminine strength. Catherine's breath caught as she recognized several pieces from photographs and formal portraits, jewelry that she had seen worn by the Queen Mother on special occasions, pieces that carried the weight of decades and the memories of countless important moments in royal history. The sight of them sitting in the intimate setting of her family's sitting room created a surreal juxtaposition between the formal world of monarchy and the personal space of home. "She wanted you to have these," Alexandra said simply, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was offering. "Not through official channels, not as part of the formal inheritance process, but as gifts between women who understood the unique challenges and privileges of our position. She believed you would understand their significance and honor their history while making them part of your own story." The silence that followed Alexandra's words was filled with the weight of centuries of royal tradition being challenged by an act of personal compassion and understanding. Catherine stared at the jewelry, understanding immediately that accepting these pieces would mean accepting responsibility for preserving not just their physical beauty, but their emotional and historical significance. "But the protocols," Catherine said softly, her mind racing through the implications of what Alexandra was suggesting. "Surely there are established procedures for distributing Her late Majesty's personal effects. Won't there be questions, investigations, consequences for both of us?" Alexandra's smile was sad but determined as she met Catherine's concerned gaze. "There will likely be all of those things," she admitted. "But my mother's final wish was that you have these pieces, and I believe that honoring her personal desires is more important than maintaining institutional procedures that she herself questioned in her final months." Charlotte appeared in the doorway, announcing that tea was ready with the solemnity of a royal page, though her eyes immediately went to the sparkling contents of the leather case. "Oh," she breathed, moving closer with the natural fascination that children have for beautiful, glittering things. "They're like fairy tale jewels." "Indeed they are," Alexandra said, her voice warm with affection for the child whose innocent wonder seemed to lighten the heavy atmosphere of their conversation.
They belonged to your great-grandmother, and to her mother before her, and to queens and princesses going back many generations. Each piece has stories to tell. Catherine watched her daughter's fascination with the jewelry and felt a sudden understanding of what the Queen Mother had intended. These weren't just valuable objects to be stored in vaults or worn on state occasions. They were tangible connections between generations of royal women, links in a chain that connected past struggles and triumphs with present challenges and future possibilities. "Tell me more about what she said," Catherine requested, settling back into her chair as Charlotte curled up beside her, still staring at the jewelry with wide eyes. "Help me understand what she truly wanted, not just about these pieces, but about my role in this family's future." Alexandra's expression grew thoughtful as she began to share the deeper conversations she had had with her mother in those final months. Conversations that had revealed the Queen Mother's concerns about the monarchy's ability to evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential character. The afternoon light began to fade as the two women talked, their conversation weaving between personal memories and institutional responsibilities, between family loyalty and royal duty. Outside, the sounds of Windsor Great Park continued their eternal rhythm, deer moving through the forest and birds settling into their evening roosts, indifferent to the human drama unfolding in the cottage. Inside, two women from different generations were forging a connection that would redefine their relationship and challenge centuries of established protocol in service of something more fundamental than rules and traditions. The leather case sat open between them, its contents gleaming in the lamplight as evening approached, waiting to be claimed or refused in a decision that would echo through the monarchy for years to come. Catherine reached out tentatively, her fingers hovering over the small diamond tiara that the Queen Mother had worn to Alexandra's wedding, understanding that touching it would mean accepting not just a gift, but a responsibility that would forever change her position within the royal family. The weight of that decision pressed down on both women as they sat in the comfortable silence of the cottage, surrounded by the evidence of normal family life, but contemplating actions that were anything but ordinary. Whatever happened next would be determined not by protocol or precedent, but by the courage of two women choosing to honor love over law, understanding over tradition, and human connection over institutional convenience. The grandfather clock in the corner of the sitting room chimed 6 o'clock, its deep, resonant tones seeming to underscore the gravity of the moment, as Catherine finally allowed her fingers to touch the delicate surface of the diamond tiara. The metal felt surprisingly warm, as if it held within it the essence of all the women who had worn it before, their joys and sorrows, their triumphs and struggles, somehow embedded in the precious stones that caught and reflected the lamplight like captured memories. Alexandra watched Catherine's face carefully, seeing the play of emotions that crossed her features as she lifted the tiara and examined its intricate craftsmanship. The piece had been created in 1898 by Garrard, the royal jewelers, commissioned by Queen Victoria as a wedding gift for a beloved granddaughter. It had passed through several hands over the decades, each owner adding her own history to its legacy, until it had come to rest in the Queen Mother's private collection. "She wore this on the day I married Timothy," Alexandra said softly, her voice thick with memory. "I remember watching her get ready that morning, how carefully she placed it on her head, how she stood before the mirror and seemed to draw strength from wearing something that connected her to all the royal brides who had come before. She said it was like having the blessing of previous generations." Catherine turned the tiara slowly in her hands, marveling at its delicate beauty and substantial weight. It was smaller than the grand state pieces that she had worn on formal occasions, more intimate in scale yet somehow more powerful in its emotional impact. She could imagine the Queen Mother wearing it, could almost feel the presence of the older woman guiding her hands as she explored its familiar contours. Charlotte had moved closer during their conversation, her fascination with the jewelry eventually overcoming her training in proper royal behavior. She reached out tentatively to touch a strand of pearls, her small fingers gentle against the lustrous surface that had been worn by queens and princesses for over a century. "Mummy," she whispered, "they're like magic, aren't they?" The child's innocent observation carried more truth than she realized. Catherine thought there was something magical about these pieces, something that transcended their monetary value or historical significance. They represented continuity and connection, the invisible threads that bound generations of royal women together, in shared understanding of duty, sacrifice, and service that few others could comprehend.
"They are magical," Catherine agreed, her voice soft with wonder. "But the real magic isn't in the jewels themselves. It's in the love and wisdom that each woman who wore them passed along to the next generation. They're like letters written in gold and diamonds, messages from the past to help us understand our present." Alexandra felt a surge of emotion at Catherine's words, recognizing in them the same understanding that had drawn the Queen Mother to the younger woman in the first place. This was exactly what her mother had hoped for, this intuitive grasp of what the monarchy truly meant beneath all its pageantry and protocol. The Queen Mother had seen in Catherine a woman who could honor tradition while bringing it forward into the modern age. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway interrupted their reverie, followed by the familiar voices of William and the boys returning from their afternoon at football practice. Catherine quickly moved to close the leather case, her movements swift and protective as she realized that the arrival of other family members would complicate an already delicate situation. Alexandra's eyes widened with something approaching panic as she understood that their private conversation was about to become a family matter. "Catherine?" William's voice called from the entrance hall, followed by the thundering footsteps of two boys eager to share the events of their afternoon. "We're back!" Lewis scored 3 goals and George made an incredible save. The enthusiasm in his voice spoke of the joy he found in these normal family moments, the relief of being simply a father rather than a future king for a few precious hours each day. Catherine looked at Alexandra with a question in her eyes, unsure whether to reveal the older woman's presence or attempt to keep their conversation private. The decision was taken from her hands when George burst into the sitting room, his football kit still muddy and his face glowing with excitement from the afternoon's activities. "Aunt Alexandra!" he exclaimed, using the informal title that had been established for family gatherings, his surprise at her presence evident but not unwelcome. "Did you see us play? We won 4-2. His enthusiasm was infectious, and despite the tension of the moment, Alexandra found herself smiling at the boy's obvious joy. William appeared in the doorway moments later, taking in the scene with the quick assessment that had become second nature to him as both a royal family member and a protective father. His eyes moved from Alexandra's carefully controlled expression to Catherine's slightly flushed face to the leather case that sat closed but somehow prominent on the coffee table between them. "Alexandra," he said, his tone carefully neutral but carrying an undertone of curiosity. "This is unexpected. I hope everything is well?" The question was posed politely, but Catherine could hear the subtle concern that colored his words. William had developed an instinct for detecting situations that might require careful handling, a skill essential for anyone in his position. "William," Alexandra replied, rising from her chair with the graceful composure that had been drilled into her from childhood. "I was just sharing some memories of your grandmother with Catherine. We were discussing her final wishes regarding some personal matters. The careful phrasing was designed to convey significance without revealing details that might be better kept private until decisions were made." Lewis appeared at his father's side, still bouncing with post-game energy, his attention immediately captured by the gleaming contents of the leather case that Catherine had not quite managed to conceal. "What's in the box?" he asked with the directness that characterized children his age, moving closer to investigate despite his mother's gentle restraining hand on his shoulder. William's expression grew more serious as he began to piece together the implications of Alexandra's presence and the mysterious case. He had spent enough years navigating royal politics to recognize when family members were engaged in conversations that went beyond casual socializing. The timing of Alexandra's visit, coming so soon after the formal inventory of the Queen Mother's effects had been scheduled, suggested complications that could affect the entire family. "Perhaps," William said carefully, "we should continue this conversation after the children have had their dinner and settled for the evening. Would you be able to stay, Alexandra?" "We'd be honored to have you join us for family dinner." The invitation was genuine, but Catherine could hear the underlying request for more information about what had transpired during their private conversation. Alexandra looked at Catherine with a question in her eyes, seeking guidance about how to proceed. The arrival of William and the children had changed the dynamics of their situation dramatically, transforming what had been a private exchange between two women into a potential family crisis that would require careful handling to avoid wider complications. I think that would be wonderful, Catherine said, making the decision for both of them. Charlotte has made biscuits for tea, and Cook has prepared shepherd's pie for dinner. We can have a proper family evening and continue our conversation afterward. Her tone was warm and welcoming, but William knew his wife well enough to detect the underlying tension that suggested this dinner would be more significant than a casual family gathering. The next 2 hours passed with the careful choreography of royal family life, where important conversations were suspended in favor of maintaining normal routines for the children's benefit. Charlotte proudly served her homemade biscuits with tea, while George and Louis regaled the adults with detailed accounts of their football match, their enthusiasm providing a welcome distraction from the weightier matters that awaited adult attention. Alexandra found herself relaxing into the domestic warmth of Adelaide Cottage, remembering why her mother had been so drawn to Catherine's ability to create genuine family atmosphere even within the constraints of royal life. Watching William interact with his children, seeing the easy affection between Catherine and Charlotte, observing the way the family teased and laughed together, she began to understand what the Queen Mother had meant about preserving the human elements of monarchy in an increasingly challenging world. During dinner, Alexandra shared stories about William's childhood visits to the Queen Mother, tales that delighted the children and seemed to ease some of the tension that had marked the earlier part of the evening. She spoke of royal Christmas celebrations and summer holidays at Balmoral, painting pictures of a family that, despite its extraordinary circumstances, had always prioritized genuine relationships alongside official duties. Granny always said that being royal was about service, George said seriously, repeating words that had been shared with him in countless conversations about his future responsibilities. But she also said it was about taking care of each other, especially during difficult times. The wisdom in his young voice reflected the careful way he had been raised to understand both the privileges and obligations of his birthright. Alexandra felt her throat tighten at the boy's words, hearing in them an echo of her mother's voice and values. This was exactly what the Queen Mother had hoped to preserve and pass forward. This understanding that duty and love were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of service to both family and nation. As the evening progressed and the children were settled for the night with stories and gentle conversations about the day's events, the three adults returned to the sitting room, where the leather case waited like a silent participant in their family drama. The relaxed atmosphere of dinner gave way to the more serious tone required for discussions that would affect not just their immediate relationships, but potentially the future structure of royal inheritance and protocol. William poured himself a whiskey and offered the same to Alexandra, who accepted gratefully, needing the steadying influence of familiar ritual as they prepared to address the complications that her afternoon visit had created. Catherine chose tea, seeking comfort in the simple ceremony that had always helped her think clearly during challenging moments. "Now then," William said, settling into his chair with the patient demeanor of someone accustomed to navigating complex family dynamics, "perhaps you could help me understand exactly what's brought you here this evening, Alexandra, and what role these mysterious contents of your case are meant to play in our family's future." The question was posed gently but carried the weight of William's position as both Catherine's husband and second in line to the throne. Whatever decisions were made in this room would need his support and understanding, and Alexandra realized that her conversation with Catherine had evolved into something far more complex than she had originally anticipated. Catherine reached for the leather case, her decision crystallizing as she understood that there could be no halfway measures in what they were contemplating. Either they would move forward together as a family, supporting each other through the challenges that would inevitably follow, or they would retreat to the safety of established protocol and accept the consequences of that choice. "Your grandmother," Alexandra began, looking directly at William as she prepared to explain the full scope of what she was proposing, had very specific ideas about what this family needs to survive and prosper in the years ahead. What I've brought here tonight represents her final gift to Catherine. But accepting it will require courage from all of us and a willingness to challenge assumptions that have guided royal inheritance for centuries. The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy curtain, marking the end of the evening's lighter moments and the beginning of a conversation that would test the bonds of family loyalty against the demands of institutional tradition. Outside, Windsor Great Park settled into the quiet rhythms of night, indifferent to the human drama unfolding within the cottage walls.
while inside, 3 people prepared to make decisions that would resonate through the royal family for generations to come. The leather case opened once again under the warm lamplight of the sitting room, but this time its contents seemed to carry even greater significance as William leaned forward to examine the pieces that had captured his wife's attention and prompted his aunt's unprecedented visit. The sight of his grandmother's personal jewelry, arranged so carefully outside the formal context of royal ceremonies, created an emotional impact that he hadn't anticipated. Memories of the Queen Mother flooding back with startling clarity and force. Alexandra watched William's face as recognition dawned, seeing him identify specific pieces that had been part of his childhood experience of royal life. The sapphire brooch had been a frequent sight at family gatherings. The pearl necklace had graced countless state dinners, and the small diamond tiara had appeared in formal photographs that documented decades of royal history. Each piece carried not just monetary value, but the weight of personal memory and family connection. "I remember this," William said softly, reaching for the sapphire brooch with careful fingers. "She wore it to my confirmation, said it had belonged to her mother and that wearing it made her feel connected to all the family members who couldn't be present for important moments. She had a way of making jewelry feel like family members rather than just valuable objects." Catherine felt a surge of emotion at William's words, understanding that his recognition and acceptance of these pieces' significance would be crucial to whatever decision they made about Alexandra's extraordinary offer. She had been prepared for his potential disapproval, for concerns about protocol and precedent that might override emotional considerations, but his gentle handling of the brooch suggested a deeper understanding of what was truly at stake. "She spoke to me about continuity in those final weeks," Alexandra continued, her voice growing stronger as she shared more of her mother's final thoughts. "Not the institutional continuity that everyone always discusses, but the personal continuity that connects one generation to the next through shared understanding and mutual support. She worried that the formal structures of inheritance were losing sight of the human connections that make them meaningful." William set the brooch carefully back in its place and looked directly at his aunt, his expression serious but not disapproving. "You're talking about changing fundamental aspects of how royal inheritance works," he said. "The implications go far beyond these specific pieces, don't they? If we accept Granny's personal wishes over established protocol in this instance, we're essentially saying that individual judgment can supersede institutional procedure." The weight of William's observation settled over the room as all 3 adults contemplated the broader consequences of what they were considering. Royal inheritance had been governed by strict protocols for centuries, precisely because personal preferences and family dynamics could create chaos if allowed to override established systems. Yet here they were, contemplating exactly that kind of override in service of what the Queen Mother had believed was a higher purpose. "Perhaps," Catherine said carefully, "the question isn't whether we're changing fundamental aspects of inheritance, but whether we're honoring the fundamental purpose that inheritance is meant to serve. These pieces were important to Her late Majesty not because of their value, but because of their ability to connect people across generations and provide comfort during difficult times." Alexandra felt a surge of gratitude toward Catherine for articulating what she herself had been struggling to express. This was exactly the kind of understanding that had drawn the Queen Mother to the younger woman, this ability to see past the surface complexity of royal life to the underlying human needs that justified all the ceremony and tradition. "What exactly did she say about Catherine specifically?" William asked, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. "Help me understand why she felt these pieces should go to my wife rather than following traditional distribution channels." The question was practical but carried deeper implications about family relationships and the Queen Mother's assessment of who could best honor her legacy. Alexandra took a deep breath before sharing the most personal aspects of her mother's final conversations. Words that had been meant for private family consideration, but now seemed essential to the decision they were making together. She said that Catherine reminded her of herself at a young age, facing the challenge of adapting to royal life while maintaining her own identity and values. She believed that Catherine understood the balance between honoring tradition and making it relevant to contemporary life. The comparison to the Queen Mother carried enormous weight, given the elderly monarch's legendary ability to modernize royal practices while preserving their essential dignity and meaning. Catherine felt both honored and intimidated by the comparison, understanding that accepting these pieces would mean accepting the responsibility to live up to such high expectations and standards. She also said, Alexandra continued, that the future of the monarchy depended on people who could bridge the gap between institutional requirements and human needs, who could make the royal family feel accessible and relevant while maintaining its mystique and authority. She saw that quality in Catherine and wanted to support it in tangible ways. William reached for his wife's hand, squeezing it gently as he processed his grandmother's assessment of Catherine's role in the family's future. He had watched his wife navigate the challenges of royal life with grace and determination, but hearing his grandmother's explicit endorsement of Catherine's approach provided validation that he knew would mean a great deal to both of them. "There's another consideration," William said thoughtfully. "If we accept these pieces through unofficial channels, we need to be prepared for the questions and potential criticism that will inevitably follow. The palace will notice their absence from the formal inventory, and there will be demands for explanations that could put all of us in difficult positions." The practical implications of their decision began to crystallize as William spoke, creating a sobering counterpoint to the emotional appeal of honoring the Queen Mother's wishes. Royal life was lived under constant scrutiny, and actions that might seem perfectly reasonable in private family contexts could become sources of public controversy and institutional strain when viewed through the lens of constitutional monarchy. "What if," Catherine suggested, "we approach this as an opportunity to have a broader conversation about how royal inheritance works in the modern age? Rather than hiding what we're doing, we could be transparent about honoring personal wishes alongside institutional procedures. We could use this as a chance to show that the monarchy can evolve thoughtfully rather than just reacting to external pressures." Alexandra's eyes widened at Catherine's suggestion, recognizing both its boldness and its potential wisdom. Rather than treating their actions as violations of protocol to be concealed, they could frame them as examples of how traditional structures could adapt to serve contemporary needs while preserving their essential functions and values. "That would require enormous courage," William said slowly, "and complete unity among family members who might not appreciate having their own inheritance expectations affected by precedents we establish. Are we prepared for the family divisions that could result from taking such a public stand?" The question hung in the air as all three contemplated the potential consequences of their decision rippling through the extended royal family and affecting relationships that had been carefully maintained for decades. Change rarely came without cost, and the cost of challenging established inheritance protocols could be measured in family harmony as well as public perception. "Your grandmother lived through enormous changes in her 99 years, Catherine said quietly. She saw the monarchy adapt to 2 world wars, the end of empire, the rise of modern media, and countless social transformations that required royal traditions to evolve or become irrelevant. Maybe what she's asking us to do isn't really so different from what she did throughout her own life." Alexandra felt tears prick her eyes at Catherine's words, hearing in them an understanding of her mother's character that went far deeper than formal protocol or ceremonial interaction. The Queen Mother had indeed been a master of thoughtful adaptation, finding ways to preserve essential values while allowing surface practices to change with the times. "She would want us to be brave," Alexandra said with sudden certainty. "She would want us to choose the path that serves the monarchy's future rather than simply maintaining its past. These pieces were never meant to sit in vaults or be trotted out only for state occasions. They were meant to live and breathe and connect people across generations." William stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark expanse of Windsor Great Park while he considered the full scope of what they were contemplating. The decision they made tonight would affect not just their immediate family relationships, but potentially influence how the monarchy approached tradition and change for years to come. "If we do this," he said finally, turning back to face the 2 women, "we do it properly and completely. No half measures. No attempts to hide or minimize what we're doing. We accept these pieces as Catherine's rightful inheritance based on Granny's expressed wishes, and we defend that decision publicly if necessary." Catherine felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror at William's words, understanding that he was offering his full support for a course of action that could have far-reaching consequences for all of them. The weight of the Queen Mother's expectations seemed to press down on her shoulders as she contemplated the responsibility she was accepting. "What about the children?" she asked, thinking of George, Charlotte, and Louis, sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware that their parents were making decisions that could affect their own futures in ways that were impossible to predict. How do we ensure that what we're doing serves their interests as well as honoring past wishes? Alexandra moved to the leather case and carefully lifted out the small diamond tiara, holding it so that the lamplight caught and reflected off its faceted stones like tiny stars. We teach them that love and wisdom are more valuable than rules and regulations, she said softly. We show them that their great-grandmother's final gift was not jewelry but understanding, not valuable objects but valuable relationships. The tiara seemed to pulse with significance as Alexandra held it, representing not just the Queen Mother's personal history, but the future that she had envisioned for her family and her institution. Catherine reached out and took the piece with steady hands, feeling its familiar weight and understanding finally that accepting it meant accepting a legacy of thoughtful courage that had guided royal women for generations. Then we do it, Catherine said, her voice clear and determined. We honor her wishes and accept the consequences, whatever they may be. We trust that love and understanding are stronger foundations than fear and protocol. She placed the tiara gently back in the case, but not before holding it for a long moment that felt like receiving a blessing from the woman who had worn it with such dignity and grace. Outside, Windsor Great Park settled deeper into the quiet rhythms of night, while inside, Adelaide Cottage, 3 people completed a conversation that would echo through royal history as an example of how institutions could honor both tradition and transformation. The leather case sat open between them, its contents no longer representing a problem to be solved, but a gift to be treasured and a responsibility to be embraced with courage and wisdom. As Alexandra prepared to leave the cottage, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her since her mother's death. She had fulfilled her final duty as the Queen Mother's daughter, ensuring that her mother's deepest wishes were honored and that her legacy of thoughtful adaptation would continue into the next generation. The drive back to London would give her time to prepare for the conversations and explanations that would inevitably follow. But for now, she was content knowing that love had triumphed over protocol, and that the future of the monarchy was in capable, caring hands. Catherine and William stood together in their doorway, watching the car disappear into the darkness, both understanding that their lives had changed irrevocably in the space of a single evening. The pieces, now in their possession, represented more than inherited jewelry. They represented a covenant with the past and a commitment to a future where royal service would be guided by wisdom, compassion, and courage, rather than simply by the weight of tradition and the fear of change. The next morning would bring new challenges and difficult conversations with palace officials who would struggle to understand how personal wishes could supersede institutional procedures. But tonight, in the quiet warmth of their family home, Catherine and William held each other close and felt the presence of the Queen Mother's blessing on a decision that honored both the woman she had been and the institution she had served with such dedication throughout her remarkable life.